My name is Victoria Taiwo, and welcome to the 2020 CFC Application Training for Independent and Member Organizations. I'm one of 3 operations specialists in the OPM CFC office, and we oversee the application process for all charities. So today I am assisted by our Deputy CFC Director, Anthony Cristoforo, and Rashard Adams, one of our staff assistants. For those joining online, welcome. So before we get started, for the people in the room, if you need to go to the restroom, it's out the auditorium on the left-hand side. Just go straight down. So before we get started in the application process, going over that entire process from beginning to end, let's just kind of talk about some of the overview of the CFC program, what we call CFC Facts. So the program was established in 1961, so it's been around for a really long time. In 2016, there was an additional executive order that was issued to allow the CFC to solicit from retirees and for us to solicit volunteer pledges from charities who have different opportunities for employees who may or may not have money to give, but they can give time. So that increases the number of donors by a lot. It's the Combined Federal Campaign is the only government authorized solicitation of employees in the federal workplace, so there aren't any other opportunities for charities to go in and try to solicit funds from federal employees. The program has raised over $8 billion since its existence, again, dating back to 1961. So it is still the most successful workplace giving program in the world. The program is overseen by the U.S. Office of Personnel Management. So the regulations, they're housed at OPM. In terms of for the charities and for the donors, you're probably more accustomed to working with our marketing companies that run the campaigns at the local zones. But in terms of if you have any policy-related questions, those types of questions would have to come to OPM. The campaign starts each year in the fall, so we are required to hold a campaign annually. The program will run until the beginning of early January. Those dates change from year to year because those dates are set by the director of OPM. So disbursements begin April of the following year and continues monthly for the next 11 months. So let's take the 2020 application year. So the campaign will start fall 2020. It will end January 2021. Your disbursements will start April 1, 2021, and then you'll get monthly disbursements until March of 2022. So today we'll go over the advisory statement, setting up an account on our website, which is CFC Charities at OPM. CFC Charities, our charity website, I'll get that to you. Required documents, the application process, signing, unsigning, editing, and paying, and eligibility decisions and appeals. So our goal for this training is by the time that you leave, you know all the requirements of the CFC application process, and you'll have the information and the guidance needed to submit successful applications, because we do want all of our charities that apply to get into the program. So if you have a question during this training, if you're online, you can send your questions to cfc@opm.gov. But also keeping in mind that we are covering a lot of information today, so most likely your question will be answered. So, but if it's a particular topic that I've covered and you still have a question, please send an email to cfc@opm.gov. If you're in the auditorium, you can step up to the mic, the standing mic, or you can send your question to this website as well. We'll also be doing live polling today just to kind of gauge your knowledge of the process and what are the requirements of the program. So you can do this. You don't have to register on the website. You could use your phone, your computer, or your tablet. Go to live.voxvote.com, and you just need to enter the PIN number 38395. So as we go through this training, we'll come to different knowledge checks, and then just register your vote. So again, you don't have to register, you just go to the website and enter in the PIN number. So I'll leave this up for a few seconds just to make sure that you guys get the website address before we get started. So very first question, what city do you live in? So our very first question is, what city do you live in? So you go to, sorry? I don't have it, so if you don't have connection, I'm sorry. So go to voxvote.com, live.voxvote.com. The PIN number is 38395. Okay, you can start to vote now. So let's refresh the screen to see we have more. Okay, so we have a lot of representation. So the reason why this is the very first question is because I asked for the city, and I see states up there. So Virginia, Maryland, California, DC, Kentucky, those are not cities. And with this application process, you need to make sure that you're reading the instructions, you understand the instructions, and you answer what is being asked. So if this was a application question, your charity would be denied participation because you answered the question incorrectly. So that was, first of all, to know where you're from, and then also just to give an example of charities being not answering what we're asking. So please just keep that in mind. If you're answering the questions that are on the application, 9 times out of 10, your application is successful. So the overview of the application process. So it's an online application. The system will open up this year, Monday, December 2nd, and it will close Friday, January 31st. Please make sure that you are aware of those dates. So again, December 2nd until January 31st. So every year we have charities that miss the deadline because they didn't submit their application or they didn't complete their submit their application fee. Your application is not complete until you submit the fee. Or charities wait till the last minute, and you wait until the last minute, then you have system issues, and it's the next day, it's 12:01, the system closes at midnight. Because you waited until the last day to submit your application, that is not an urgency on our part. We are not staffed until midnight, so please complete your application early. You can edit your application if you realize, oh, I forgot something. You can edit your application up until the deadline, but make sure that you're aware of that January 31st date. We have had extensions in the past. We're hoping to not have an extension this year. So last year was because of the government shutdown. It was not something that we could avoid. I'm really hoping that we could just cut it off January 31st because it does impact our workload to making sure that we start the campaign on time. With the application, we have what we call full applications and verification applications. So applications are due every year. If you're looking to participate in that year's campaign, you are required to submit an application. Some charities think that I submitted an application, I don't have to do it the next year, or it's just not required. That's not true. There is an application every year. For the 2020 application, the group 1, and when you log into your application, you'll see where it will have a group 1, 2, or 3. For 2020, group 1 applicants are submitting full applications, which means it's the entirety of the application. You're submitting the areas of service where you describe what services that you did. You're submitting financial statements, it's everything. The verification application, that is an abbreviated application, and it's the certification statements in the IRS Form 990, so you're not required to submit the areas of service and the financial statements. So look at it as a 3-year cycle. Once in that 3-year cycle, you're required to submit the full application, and then the other 2 years, you're required to submit the verification application. If you get denied participation in that year's campaign, you're more than welcome, and you should submit an application the next year. You're required to submit a full application. If you change the type of your application, you go from local application or you go from national, international to international, you're required to submit a full application. We will be sending out a completeness review checklist. So if you've been in the program for a while, you know that years ago, when you submitted your CFC application, there was a completeness review. And that meant that someone would look over your application and say, you forgot to do this, you forgot to do that. We no longer do that. So we have a checklist that goes step by step, every part of the application, to walk you through what is required and to serve as a checklist for you to make sure that your application is complete. Use that checklist. We have charities that get denied and say, well, why didn't you tell us that this was missing, or I could have submitted that? We gave you that information, you have that checklist, use it. The application process is a 2-part entry process. So what will begin December 2nd is the application phase of the process. And that is where you complete the application, you pay your application fee. And then a few months go by, you wait for your eligibility decision, and then we tell you yes or no, approved or denied. If you're approved, you're not done yet. You still need to go back into the system and complete your listing information. So there's additional information that you need to complete, and there's a payment of a listing fee. So we have charities that submit their applications, they pay the application fee, and they walk away. And then when the campaign is going on, they don't see their name on the list. And they say, well, I submitted this fee. Why am I not listed? Because you did not complete the listing process. So I'm saying it again, it's a two-part process, the application and the listing fee. Once you get your approval letter, you're not done. You still need to go into the system and complete your listing, the listing process. And that normally takes place in the summer. And if you're denied, we'll talk about that later, but if you're denied, you will have an opportunity to submit an appeal to the director of OPM. So this is the advisory statement. So in essence, it basically says, tell the truth on your CFC application. If you do not, you risk a fine, imprisonment. We don't want to throw anyone in CFC jail. We don't want to fine anyone. We just want you to tell the truth on your CFC application. So required documents. So on the left side, you see the full application. On the right side, you see the verification application. So certification statements, you see that it covers both the full application and the verification application. Certification statements are required for all applicants on each step. So we have charities that don't complete the certification statements. They're required. That is a really sad reason to get denied because you did not check yes to certify to a statement. The areas of service is only on the full application side. So as I mentioned before, that's only due once every 3 years. An IRS determination letter, group exemption letter, or parent organization verification letter, that's only required of full applications, unless if you're an organization that is a relatively new charity and you don't show up on the IRS business master file, or maybe you were suspended, but the list just hasn't been updated yet, you might not appear on the IRS BMF, and in that case, you would be required to submit an IRS determination letter. So a point that I do want to make here is, of course, we all know that we need to be a 501c3 organization to participate in the program. During that next year, during the disbursement period, you must still retain your 501c3 status. If your organization loses your 501c3 status, you will be notified by the IRS. It's not our responsibility to notify you because you lost that exemption status with the IRS. However, we will send you a notification to say, you're no longer on the IRS business master file. We're withholding your funds until you resolve that issue with the IRS. So if you get that letter, that notification from the IRS saying you've lost your status and they normally give you a period of time to resolve that, please resolve that because it will hold up you getting your disbursements. And if you are a member of a federation, it is your responsibility to notify your federation to let them know of your change in status so they can help you through that. But we do have some situations where members don't inform their federations, and if too much time passes by and we're at the end of the disbursement cycle, that money is no longer available. Financial statements are only required of full applications. So that's once every 3 years. And the requirements are, that would be an audit or reviewed financial statements. And we'll talk about that shortly. The IRS Form 990 or the pro forma IRS Form 990, that's due every year of all applicants. The CFC does allow charities to be listed with a name other than their legal name. So if you're an organization, say your organization was founded 30 years ago, and since that time, you're now known by a different name. Thank you. You are allowed to be listed with what we call a listing name, but you must submit documentation to support the usage of that name. And we will talk about that shortly. So now let's get into the fun stuff, the CFC application system. So we're gonna do another live poll, a knowledge check here. So the question is, charities are required to submit CFC applications every year. True or false? The website address is live.voxvote.com. The PIN number is 38395. Yep. Charities are required to submit CFC applications every year. So Rashard, let's refresh that screen. $38395. So, good. The majority of you said that that's true. That is true. So, regardless of if you're doing a full application or a verification application, that is still an application and it is still due every year. The fees, and we'll talk about the application fees and the listing fees, are the same regardless if you're doing a full application or a listing or a verification application. So to access the charity application site, please go to charities.opm.gov. So most of you probably are already existing charities, and that's great. So in that case, you would just go to the website, enter your email address and your password, and you log right in. If you are a new user, a new charity, you've not participated in our program, then you would hit create an account, and on the next page, you are required to enter your name, your email address, and password, and then you will be prompted to answer challenge questions for password resets. So please write down those answers to your questions. We get charities emailing us saying we don't remember the answers to the challenge questions, so please write that down. If it's been a while since you've been in the system, I think it probably will ask you to update your password. So once you're logged into the system, you'll be taken to the Your Charities page. So In the case of most organizations, most independent organizations, or even members, when you go into the Your Charities page, you'll only see the name of your charity. So you won't see a really long listing. If you're a federation, then of course you would see a lot of charities on this page. So once you see the name of your charity or the charity that you're working on that application, you would hit Start Application towards the right-hand side of the page. Or at the very top of the page, you could hit Start Application to begin. Under Role, so for each user, you will be assigned owner or editor by someone within your organization, and we'll talk about that shortly. So it'll just let you know what your role is for that application. If you are going into the system and you do not have access to an application, you would hit Request Access to a Charity. You put in the CFC code, and that email will go to the owner of that application, and then they need to grant you access. So if you don't have access, find out who has the owner role at your organization and have them grant you access. OPM cannot do that. The help desk cannot grant you access. We don't know who you are. The person at your organization knows who you are and can validate that you need access to that application. So under your name, you'll see it on the right-hand side. You'll have different options. So home will always take you to the Your Charities page. Access, again, you can request access by hitting on that tab. Settings, that's where you will go to change your password, your challenge question, or any profile information. Help, frequently asked questions. Those questions and answers are pretty robust. So we get a lot of questions that we already have published, have made available on the website. So please visit the FAQ part of the website and see if your question is already answered there. And then if not, definitely email our office. We'll be more than happy to help you. But a lot of times you can get your question answered a lot faster by just going to the FAQs. And then log out is to exit the system. So this is what the charity access and invitations and requests page looks like. So it will have the charity name, the code, and then it will normally say there would be an action where it would say approve or decline. So again, that user management can only be done by owners of that particular application. So if you're an owner, this is where you would manage inviting other owners to have access to the application or editors. This is the user settings page. So this is how you would update your security questions or your email address and then change your password. FAQs, I've mentioned that already. So let me talk a little bit more about the user roles. So we already know that there are two, owner and editor. An owner can do everything in that application. So they have full access. They can perform user management, they can manage affiliations, and there can be multiple owners. Charity editors have to be granted rights by the charity owner, cannot perform user management, so they can't invite other editors or owners. And there also can be multiple editors. So you're not limited in the number of editors or owners that you can have in the system. So again, if you need access, find out who has access at your organization, because OPM cannot grant you that access. So this goes through the process of how to add a user. So we've talked about that already. This is how you request that access to the charity. So please make sure that you're entering an email address that you have access to, the correct email address, and that you have access to it, because as you're submitting these requests, it goes to your email. So if you put something that you no longer have access to, or you put the wrong email address, then you'll have a hard time getting access to that charity record. So please hold all questions until the end. I will definitely have time at the end for questions. So this is for new charities. If you've not participated in the program and you enter your organization's EIN number and you're not found on the IRS Business Master File, then you can add your information into the system. So you would click Add Charity Information, and then you would just fill out Add Charity to our system, this information here. So your organization's EIN number, organization name, the organization address, which cannot be a P.O. box. So it has to be a physical address. It can't be a P.O. box, mailbox, etc., UPS, or anywhere where you just get mail. It has to be a physical address. Please make sure you enter your EIN number correctly. So we do have charities that are off by one, or it's an 8-digit number, or any number of things where your EIN number is not correct. Now you're running into a situation where we don't see you on the IRS Business Master File, and if you're not on the BMF, you can't participate in the program. Once you add your information, you'll get a CFC code. Please write down that code, keep that. Anytime that you're contacting our office, please have your CFC code. So if you send us an email, include your CFC number. So if you send us an email, a lot of times we can't quickly find you because maybe the way we're spelling the name of your organization is different than the way you put it into the system, or there are multiple organizations in the country with your name. We don't know which one belongs to you. So now we have to go back to you to ask you, well, what's your CFC code? It's just wasting time to get you the information that you need. So please always give us your organization's CFC code. That number always belongs to you. It will not be taken away and given to another charity. If you don't apply 1 year, or you don't apply for 5 years, you decide 5 years later to apply, it will be the same number. Once you enter that information, it will ask you to verify your CFC code, your EIN number. So I've already talked about the importance of making sure your EIN number is correct. You can update the address if there's any discrepancy, and then you hit confirm and continue. So then you'll be taken to this page to start your charity application. So if you previously applied, the system will have a record of that. We'll say something along the lines of, last year you applied as an independent organization. Do you want to start that application? You can switch. However, it's really not so easy to do that because with a federation, so federations are distinct in the CFC program. So in the registration for the training, we were very specific in saying that only federations should register for the federation training. We still had organizations that were not federations register for that training. So a federation is an organization that is submitting an application to the CFC along with at least 15 other member applications, which includes application fees. So if you're submitting an application for just your organization, you're not a federation. So if you're an organization, let's just use Girl Scouts, for instance. There are a lot of Girl Scouts organizations throughout the country. That does not mean that they're a federation. So if you apply as a federation, federations have higher application fees. You've just paid more than you should have, and your application is getting denied. Okay, so the application process. So once you've started up your application and you're going through the different steps, there are steps 1 through 9, 11 steps in the application for independents and member organizations. If you're missing something, the system will let you know you are missing the following information. We still get applications with missing information, and that missing information is a reason for your application to be denied. We've built a lot of things to help charities in the system to avoid that from happening. So please pay attention to these types of warnings. So the very first step is the contact information. So you're not going to be denied on this step for anything. So it's where you would enter your the contact person's name, the title, email address, and the contact address. If you have, if your organization has an email address, you should put the email address here and then the fax number. So as we go through the rest of these slides, you'll see on the right-hand side, it will say completeness review check. So it corresponds to the checklist, which we will send out when the system opens. So it just, again, you'll see how we walk you through each step of the application to make sure that you're verifying this information. This blue text here on the left-hand side, it's really small, you can't see it, but when you're in the system, it basically says, we encourage you to enter as many email addresses as possible. Which brings us to a knowledge check. So another live poll question. Only the email address for the primary contact in my organization can be entered on the CFC application. So true or false? Only the email address for the primary contact at my organization can be entered on the CFC application. So to vote, again, go to live.vox.com. The PIN is 38395. Okay, good. So the majority of respondents said that that's false. You can put as many email addresses as you want. So if you want to put your spouse's information, you want to put your colleagues' information, you want to put your kids' information because they're always on text or email, do that. So this is a big problem because we have a lot of charities that only enter one email address. So when we send out emails, normally there's some type of deadline that's associated to that. So if you're approved, you have to complete your listing information by a certain deadline. If you're denied, you have 10 days to submit an appeal to the director of OPM. So when you put one email address, and if you're out of the office, you're out sick, or whatever the case may be, and that deadline passes, that deadline passes. There's nothing that we can do about that. So that's why we say every year, put more than one email address down. I have more than one email address. I would put those down. If it was something I didn't want to miss, I would put my husband's email address down. And make sure that the email address is correct. Another big problem. So we have charities that enter .ocm. They don't put at and then the domain. Those email addresses, so when we send out the eligibility decisions, it gets sent out through the system. We don't get bounce backs from that. So if it gets sent out and it lands somewhere other than your email box, the deadline, that date that I mentioned, the calendar is still ticking. So, for instance, with this registration, so when you registered for the website, sending out the reminder, today's information to Charities, we got a lot of bounce backs from that because Charities entered the wrong email addresses. We don't know your email address. Please enter your correct email address. Verify, look at it, make sure it's correct, enter several. I'm talking about it a lot because every year, again, we have more than one charity. We have a lot of charities that say, we never got an email, I was on maternity leave, I was on vacation. The calendar does not stop. So the second step of the application is where you select your organization's type, local charity, national, international charity, or international charity. So we'll talk about the differences shortly, but this is more, now that we have an online pledging system, donors are able to find charities across the campaign. You're not restricted to a particular zone. However, when you're talking about paper brochures, if we were to print all charities, it would be a pretty big book. So in that case, the national, international, and international charities are always listed in all of the zones. And then for the local charities, they're only listed in the zone to which they applied. So if your charity does work in the Southern California campaign, that should be the zone that you apply to participate in that campaign. If you apply to Michigan or some other zone and you can't prove that you've done work in that zone, your application will be denied. So when we talk about the areas of services, we'll talk about the different requirements for local, national, international, and international charities. Here you would select your federation membership or independent charity. So if you're a part of a federation, you're a member, that means that there's a federation that is coordinating your application, the submission of your application. You would need to enter that federation code. If you are not a part of a federation, then you're an independent organization. If you are a member organization and you have questions regarding the application or your appeal or any part of this process, and you contact OPM, we will redirect you back to your federation. So you should be communicating with your federation. That's why, that's what you pay them to do. That's what they've signed up to do. So we will redirect you back to your federation. Which brings me back to step one. I should have mentioned this. On step one, under email addresses, and this message is really for federations, for member applications, please enter your email address, the federation's email address. If you're a member, if your organization is a member and you enter the member's email address, when we send out communication, your member will get that communication. So we get a lot of federations that are upset with us because an email reached their member Well, if you put down that email address, that's the email address. We don't have the capacity to go through 5,000 emails to find out who we should delete. So federations should always put their contact email address for their member applications. And then if you're a FSYA, FSYP, MWR, so family support youth activities or program or morale, yes, organization, then you would just select that. So the application is required. Do not select that unless you are on a military base. And also, if you select that, you should not have, they are a little bit different in terms of they should not have, I believe they should not have an EIN number. So if you are an organization that is found on the IRS BMF, you should not submit an application as a FSYA, FSYP organization. In that case, you should submit either an independent application or a member application. On this step, depending on what you select under organization type, the application will populate what's specific to you. So from here, it will be slightly different based on your organization type because of the different requirements. So we have another live poll, another knowledge check. So animal-related and environmental charities cannot participate in the campaign. So true or false? Animal-related and environmental charities cannot participate in the campaign. So the answer is false. So animal-related and animal charities can participate in the program. All 501c3 organizations can participate in the program. So the reason why we included this is because every year we get this question. Every year we get a charity that fails to certify to this certification statement on step 3 because they say, well, we're an animal-related charity, we don't work with people or some other reason, and we didn't think that we needed to certify to this statement. This statement is required of all charities. So basically, the statement says, I certify that the organization named in this application is a human health and welfare organization providing services, benefits, or assistance or conducting activities affecting human health and welfare. So even if you're an animal-related charity, you neuter cats, there's still a benefit to humans. If you save trees, there's still a benefit to humans. So again, if you're a 501c3 charity, you are able to certify to this statement and actually be telling the truth. So it's not an option, it's a requirement. And we do deny charities for not certifying to this statement. So now we'll talk about the schedule of services, the areas of services, which is step 4 of the application. And we're going to spend a lot of time on this step because it is probably the step that causes the most angst for charities. The majority of our denials are probably because of the areas of services. So we just want to make sure that we provide you as much information that we can possibly provide to make sure that you know how to write your service descriptions so you can get approved. So I mentioned earlier that the areas of services and financial statements are only required when you're submitting a full application. So for the 2020 year, that's the application that you guys are, that you will start to prepare December 2nd. That's for the 2020 campaign. You will see your group number once you log into the system. It will say group 1, 2, or 3. Group 1, you're submitting a full application. Groups 2 or 3, you're doing the verification application. The areas of service is not needed. So from steps 3 to 11, there are certification statements on each of these steps. Make sure that you read the statement that is true for your organization, that you click yes to certify to that statement before you proceed to whatever is being asked on that particular page. So for this particular step, there's a certification statement where for a local charity, so we'll talk about local charity first, and then we'll move on to national, international, and international charities. So this certification statement says, I certify that the organization named in the application has a substantial local presence in the geographical area covered by the campaign. So remember I said, if you do work in Northern California or Southern California, make sure that you apply in the zone where you have a presence, where you do work. So we have charities that will submit an application to one zone and then talk about what they did in some state that's not even close to that particular zone. In those cases, those applications get denied. So if you are required, let's talk about first, if you're not required to submit the areas of service, you will see a message on this page, on this step that says you're submitting a verification application, click next to go to the next step. If you're submitting a full application, it will tell you you're required to submit the areas of service because you're submitting a full application. And from here, you would hit add areas of service to begin to enter the information to complete this step. So it's a web-based form. It's not an attachment. It used to be called the attachment A. So if you've been in the program for a while, you're probably familiar with that. But now it's called the areas of service, and now it's a web-based form. Make sure that you're completing all the information on that form. So under service address, you'll see an address for most charities. You'll see an address there. If that is the address, if that address is correct, move on to the next entry. If it's not, you do have an opportunity to add a new address, another address. And normally that's in a case of maybe charities that have more than one location, and they're submitting an application to a zone where it doesn't correspond to their organization's address. So you are allowed to submit applications to more than one zone, but that does come with an additional application fee and listing fee. And if with the online pledging system, with charities donors being able to find you wherever you are, there really just isn't a need to do that. Make sure that you enter the hours of operation. So if you are in the program, you are required to have hours of operation where you are available to the public. So one of the reasons why the physical address is needed, because if a CFC donor wanted to come to your facility to say, well, I want to see your financial statements, they should know where to go. So make sure that you have hours of operation available. Please include a phone number that's not shared with some other entity. It should be a dedicated phone number. And then the schedule of services. So the next couple of entry boxes, that's the schedule of services, the number of beneficiaries, or the monetary value of the services. And we'll go into detail about those, because that's what causes a lot of charities problems. So if you're a local organization, you're required to have provided services in the calendar year preceding the application year that you're applying to participate in that campaign. So for the 2020 application year that we're headed towards, that means that you must have provided services in 2019. So we get questions, I'm a new charity, can I apply? If you provided services in 2019, yes, you can apply. However, if you did not provide any services in 2019, you probably shouldn't waste your money to apply to the program. So for local organizations, if you report services that you provided in 2018 or 2017, we won't consider those entries. We won't even look at it. We will only look at the services that you provided in 2019, because that's what you're required to, that's the standard that you're required to meet, 2019 services for local organizations. For the service description, you are capped at 256 characters. So if you start to type and you're really excited, you love what you do, and you have a lot to say, the system will stop you after 256 characters. We love to hear about the great work that you do, but we want you to be succinct in your description. A lot of charities say, well, how can I describe everything that we do in 256 characters? Well, you're not limited in the number of areas of services that you can submit. So on that previous page where it said that you would hit add areas of services, you can hit this multiple times. So the problem for a lot of charities is they want to talk about everything that they do in just one areas of service. So if I have a food bank and I have transitional housing in my organization, those would be two different areas of services. And 256 characters is more than enough to talk about the food bank, and then another one to talk about the transitional housing. Things like when your organization was founded, or the name of your founder or executive director, they take up space. We don't need to know that information. The year that you were founded, we don't need to know that information. Just be very, we need to know, what did you do? You could use abbreviations, as long as the abbreviations that you use, a layperson would be able to understand what those abbreviations are. So if you have a program within your organization and you want to abbreviate it, just be careful with that, because a lot of reviewers do flag those because they don't know. Just if you're talking about a program within your organization, find a way to make sure that you're clear that that's a program within your organization, because you can't claim any services that a related organization did. So if you have a partnership, you can't say this organization did this and now I'm claiming it. Well, if you both are applying to the CFC, now we're double counting services. So for local organizations, again, you can submit more than one areas of service, but you're only required to do one. So we need to see at least one. We don't need to see 50 for a local organization, or 10. I do always recommend that people do more than the minimum, just in case if there's a problem with the description, with the service that you just described, then we could look at the next one. But for local organizations, we do have some organizations that do a lot. It's not necessary. You're just putting a higher burden on yourself. I would just recommend something that's reasonable, but more than one. Now we will talk about national, international charities. So for national, international charities, you are required to provide proof of services in a minimum of 15 states, or at least one international country. So if you choose to apply as a national and international, make sure that you can meet this standard. We do get questions during the appeals process where maybe a charity submitted an application as a national, international charity or an international charity, and then they realize they can't meet that 15 state minimum or one foreign country, and they want to go to a local organization. You're not required to do that. You can't do that. So make sure that if you select national or international, you can substantiate that you did work in 15 states or that one foreign country. You can't switch it later to local to a local organization because the threshold is lower. So you would click Add Attachments. So here I always tell charities, if you're a national or international charity and you're trying to qualify based on states, I should see at least 15 areas of services. I should see at least 15 entries. If you are looking to qualify based on a foreign country, then I should see at least one. So we have situations where someone says national, international charity, and they'll have, one or two states, or they'll do the one areas of service, and then they'll say, well, we provide services across the country. No. It should be at least 15 different entries if you're looking to qualify based on states. So this page here will look a little bit different than what it looked like for local organizations. So you will need to select your country. So if you select United States, it will automatically, the next drop down will automatically be the states. So when I said foreign country, obviously foreign country does not include the United States. So you will select your state. You would provide a phone number. That phone number does not need to be different for each state that you're providing. It could be the same phone number. Because national, international, and international organizations have a higher threshold to meet when it comes to the areas of services, they do have up to a 3-year period to report services. So here you will see boxes, service descriptions, where you'll see a 2019, a 2018, and a 2017 entry boxes. So it's up to 3 years. That does not mean that you had to have provided services in each year. It's up to, just means that you have 3 years to have shown that. You're still capped at the 256 characters. You cannot use multiple areas of services to continue your thoughts from the previous one. So if you run out of space, the system won't let you type anymore, and then you say, well, I'm going to hit another add areas of services and continue talking about this service, we will ignore it. So again, make sure you check that certification statement, which basically just says that you provided services in the 15 states or the one foreign country, you provided a service address, you provided hours of operation, and you provided that dedicated phone number. For local organizations, again, make sure that it's calendar year 2019, so calendar year. Do not say fiscal year. Fiscal year is different from a calendar year. So a fiscal year can cover 2 different years. Now we don't know which year that you did these services. So if you said fiscal year 2019, then I don't know, maybe you did this in 2018. Well, I said for a local organization, we won't count any services that you provided in 2018. So make sure you're reporting services based on the calendar year. For each service, make sure that you provide the number of beneficiaries or the amount of monetary benefit of the services that you provided. You could give numbers for both, but it needs to be at least one. So if you put a service description, but you don't tell us a number of beneficiaries or the monetary value, you did not meet the requirements, you will be denied. So it needs to be one, could be both, but at least one. So the service description should clearly state who received the service, what the service was, when it was delivered, where it was delivered. So in a few instances this past year, I saw charities where they would put who, what, when, where. It was perfect. It was exactly what we needed to see. They answered the questions. They met the requirements. So I always recommend following this format: who, what, when, and where. So you don't, if you're short on characters, you don't have to type out who, what, when, and where. In these cases, the charities had enough space where they could do that, but it was just really clear and direct and to the point. So for national organizations, same thing. Make sure that the certification is checked. Make sure you have an areas of service provided for at least 15 states or one foreign country. So again, if you're qualifying based on states, how many do I need to see? At least how many? 15. So I do recommend doing a few more than the 15. So if there's something wrong with one of those 15, then I still have a 16 or a 17 to look at. So I always recommend doing a little bit more. Don't need to see 50, please. You should be able to meet this requirement without 50. We see those, we're not happy about those. Please don't do that. If you are using foreign country to qualify, you can have one foreign country and then maybe have a couple of states, because if you met that requirement based on the foreign country, that's all that we need to see. And we like it where if you're an organization where you do work both domestically and internationally, that you provide what you did internationally, because once we can qualify you based on that one, then we don't have to look at the 15 states, because there's just more room for you to maybe not meet the requirements. So if you do work internationally, I highly recommend that you report on those services. Okay, so this is the same again: who, what, when, and where really helps us. If your organization provides web-based services, that's allowed, but you are required to submit additional information. So you would need to submit evidence that recipients have registered for use of the website, summary reports documenting a customer feedback mechanism, and evidence that recipients of a web-based services paid a fee. So the web-based form on step 4 does not necessarily, if you can figure out a way to include this information, you can, but in most situations where we see an organization provides web-based services, we will send you an email asking you to submit this documentation. There will be a date that we must receive that documentation by. So remember I said that normally when we communicate with you, there's a date associated with that. Make sure that when we request that information, you send it back to us before that date. Okay, another live poll, another knowledge check. So for the service description, charities should enter the organization's mission statement. True or false? For the service description, charities should enter the organization's mission statement. True or false? And again, you can vote at live.voxvote.com, and the PIN number is 38395. So Rashard is giving you more time, so. Thank you. Okay, so great. The majority of you said that that's false. Excellent. Few people did say that was true. It's not true. So the service description basically is where we're asking you to report on the services that your organization provided. So a mission statement does not speak to what your organization did. It basically is something that's aspirational, what you do, but not what you did. So we see a lot of situations where mission statements are provided. And in those cases, we do not accept mission statements, and your application will be denied. During the listing phase, when you go back into the system, once you're approved, then there's a listing statement, which is what the donors will see. You could put your mission statement there, but not on step 4 of the application. And again, we see that a lot. So I'm gonna go through each one of these because, again, as I mentioned, the areas of service is the part of the application that causes the most angst for charities and causes us the most angst as well, because it is the part of the application where we usually find deficiencies. So I do want to be thorough to make sure that you have all the information that you need. So the very first thing here is mission statement. We don't accept that. Broad descriptions of services. So that would be saying tutoring, food bank, transitional housing. That is not giving us information. So remember I said using that guide of who, what, when, and where. So we need more than you just listing out a service. So please be please be descriptive. Repetitive narratives. So we normally see this mostly with national, international organizations, especially when you're looking to qualify based on states and you're having to provide at least 15 areas of services. So if it's a situation where the verbiage is the same for each state, that is not allowed. It actually says that in the regulations, the CFC regulations. So if the text is repetitive, we're not sure that you actually did this service. It could have just been a cut and paste exercise. So please make sure that you're not using repetitive narratives for your service descriptions. Listing affiliated groups. So if it's a situation where you're just basically saying, you're just listening to other organizations, that doesn't really tell us anything. Or I mentioned before, if you're basically reporting on something that maybe one of your partners or a related organization did, you're not allowed to do that. You actually need to be able to list what your organization has done and what your organization has done. De minimis services, benefits, assistance, or other program activities. So de minimis services or benefits basically means that the level is so low that it doesn't merit consideration. It doesn't qualify to have met the expectation. So OPM doesn't publicize what that number is for the number of beneficiaries and the monetary value, but I can tell you for the number of beneficiaries, it's not one. The monetary value is not $100. So please be mindful when you're listing your monetary value. So if it's a case where your number of beneficiaries, because sometimes maybe you did only serve one person. Well, in that case, maybe look at the monetary value of that service. Maybe it's over, it's substantial and you can report that. For national, international, and international organizations, the services or the benefits must be more than de minimis in that particular state and foreign country and for that year. So what that means is, say if I'm reporting services for Germany, so yes, I do have up to 3 years, but I can't now say for each year I did one, well, add all of those up. It has to be more than de minimis for that state or country and for that year. So we issued CFC Memorandum 2018-09, believe it was last year, for the areas of service, which is really detailed. Again, it goes through the things that you should not do, and it has best practices, things that you should do, which I've mentioned a lot of those things during this session. I highly encourage you to read this memo, become familiar with it, just be very comfortable with it. I will send out this PowerPoint presentation after today, so you'll have this link. So, and we also did a video, an updated video for the areas of service, which we will send out when it's available. Please look at that. Okay. So we're going to move on to step 5, which is the exemption status. So I mentioned before that for you to participate in the program, you have to be a 501c3 organization, which means that we should be able to find your organization's name and employer identification number on the IRS BMF. So for the vast majority of our charities, we will see you, but in some cases we won't see you, and there are additional steps that you need to take. So for this particular step, again, remember I mentioned the certification statements and that they're required. There's a certification statement here. 3 different certification statements here, depending on your organization's exemption status. Please make sure that you're selecting the correct exemption status. So option 1 basically means that you're a 501c3 organization and you're not related to any organization, any other organization. Option number 2 is that your organization is part of a group exemption. So, there's a group exemption number, and that's shared with a number of different organizations. This system will even tell you in this situation because the BMF recognizes organizations that are part of a group exemption. If you see where the system tells you, we see you are operating as a group exemption, we believe you should choose option 2. Choose option 2. The system is connected to the BMF. It's telling you what to choose. We have charities that say, well, no, I'm not. And they choose something else. That is a reason to deny your application. If your organization is a chapter or affiliate of another organization, you would check option 3. And for options 2 and 3, if you're submitting a full application, so if you're a Group 1 charity in 2020, you are required to submit additional information. So for option 2, you would submit to OPM, you will upload here a listing of all the organizations that are part of that group exemption. If you are a chapter or affiliate, you would submit a letter from, we call it a CEO letter, but it's a letter from the national organization that basically says that they recognize you, they know who you are, and that you share their EIN number, that you're covered by the national organization's financial statements and their IRS Form 990 and their tax exemption status. If you are a church or some other type of place of worship, then in that case you are required to submit the published listing. So I see this a lot with Catholic organizations. So the Catholic directory, you would need to submit to us the page where your organization appears in the Catholic directory. If you are submitting that CEO letter, make sure it was signed and dated on or after October 1, 2019. So if the letter is old, they did one for you the previous year and it's now outdated, we won't accept that. So make sure it was signed or dated on or after October 1, 2019. So on step 6 of the application, for the vast majority of our charities, they are listed in the BMF, and you'll see a message along the lines of, we found your EIN in the IRS BMF. You're not required to submit the IRS determination letter. If we don't see you on the BMF, you are required to submit to us that letter. And again, I mentioned earlier, in some cases, it could be that your organization just got the 501c3 and it didn't make it on that last update that we received of the BMF, or it could have been that it lost its tax exemption status. It's a few situations where you might not be on the BMF. And in that case, we would need you to submit that IRS determination letter. So I mentioned before that the CFC does allow you to be listed with a name other than your organization's, along with your organization's legal name. So we call that the listed name. So in the case where you are looking to be listed with a listed name and your organization's listed name, you are allowed to do that, and you must submit documentation from, normally it's a state agency or some type of body, legal authority that gives charities the ability to use that listing name. So when you submit that documentation, please check to make sure that there's not an expiration date on that documentation. So we do get those sometimes where it's expired. If it's expired, we can't list you with that name. We will not accept an application that you submitted to that state organization or that whatever that legal body is where you requested to use a listing name. So it has to be an approved documentation that's still valid. For the listing name, we will accept that group exemption list that I mentioned earlier that you would have uploaded on step 5, or that CEO letter. So if you're a group 2 or 3 applicant, you won't have the option to submit it on step 5, but you can submit it here. So for each listing name request, we call them DBA name requests. We do look those over, and we will let you know if we approve it or if we don't approve it. You'll have time to resubmit us something to be listed with that. If we deny your organization's usage of the listing name, that does not mean that your application will be denied. It just means you can't use that listing name. So don't worry if you can't use the listing name. So we do get that question. All right, another knowledge check. So my organization can submit reviewed financial statements. So true, false, or it depends. And again, you can vote at live.voxvote.com. The PIN number is 38395. So my organization can submit reviewed financial statements. True, false, or it depends. Okay, you guys are rocking. So good, it depends. So the majority of you got it right, and we'll go into why it depends now. So on step 7 of the application, that's the revenue step, there are 2 certification statements. So again, please make sure that you certify to at least one of these statements. And make sure that, it's 3 statements. Make sure that you certify to one of those 3, and make sure that you certify to the correct one. So the first one basically says that my organization's total revenue is above $250,000, and my organization is required to submit audited financial statements that complies with GAAP and GAS. Option 2 is our annual revenue is between $100,000 and $250,000, and we have an audit or reviewed financial statements. So remember, I said it depends. So if your organization's revenue is between $100,000 and $250,000, you can submit audited financial statements or reviewed financial statements. And then option 3 is our revenue was under $100,000. We aren't required to do financial statements. However, we do have controls in place to account for our funds. So again, only group 1 applicants are required to submit financial statements. So even though you must select one of these 3 certification statements, you will only be prompted to attach financial statements if you're a group 1 applicant. So although I said that For charities with revenue between $100,000 and $250,000 that you can submit reviewed financial statements or an audit. That does not mean that you can submit compiled statements or sometimes it's just like an income statement. So audit or review. So any other financial statements less in scope than an audit or a review, we won't accept under any circumstances. So when you submit the audited financial statements, make sure that the auditor's report is on letterhead with a signature. So that means that it's final. That means that the auditor has signed off on it. If it's marked as a draft, we see those, we won't accept it. If it's not signed, it's pretty much a draft, we won't accept it. It needs to be that a certified public accountant put their signature to it to say we vouch for these audited financial statements. It has to be for a fiscal period. So for the 2020 CFC application period, it has to be for a fiscal period ending on or after June 30th, 2018. So if it was for a period before that, we won't accept it. It's outdated. So again, June 30th, 2018. It has to be for the same fiscal period as the IRS Form 990 that you'll attach on step 8. The organization's name on the financial statements needs to correspond to the name on the CFC application. Really, it's the IRS determination, how the organization is listed in the IRS BMF or the DBA documentation. So in the case where you have acceptable DBA documentation, and in that case, we might see where the financial statements reference that listed name. So I said with the way that the organization is listed on the CFC application. The reason why I said that is because in some cases, charities have found a way to change the name of the organization on the CFC application. You can. We won't list you with that name. So we will only list you with the name that we see on the IRS BMF, along with the listing name if approved. So you can go change the name on the application. We're still going to verify your organization's legal name on step 6. It has to be, the financial statements must state that that the audit was conducted in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards, GAS, and in conformity with generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP, and it has to have an unqualified opinion. So if it's an audit, there has to be an opinion from the CPA. So if it basically says, the financial statements referred to above present fairly in all material aspects, except for, or we had a problem with this or something, we call that a qualified opinion. And in that case, what that normally means is that you're not in accordance with GAAP. And in that case, we would not accept the financial statements. If it is a consolidated audit, make sure that there's a separate audited schedule in the statements that includes the applicants. So this would be in the case of, say, a chapter or affiliates, they submit audited financial statements from like the national organization. We need to see some type of reference to that local organization, and there should be a separate schedule. For reviewed financial statements, which is less in scope than an audit, so there should be a CPA report again that is on letterhead with a signature. So for some reason, we get financial statements and we don't know who did the financial statements. It's not on letterhead. It has to be on letterhead. We need to be able to verify that a CPA did this. And I'm saying CPA. So if it was your board secretary, your CFO, we would not accept that. So it has to be a CPA, independent, not associated with your organization. Again, fiscal period has to be June 30th, 2018, or on or after June 30th, 2018, has to be the same fiscal period as that IRS Form 990 on step 8. And the name has to be the same as what's in the BMF or the DBA documentation, and it has to be in conformity with generally accepted accounting principles. There won't be a gas statement because it's not an audit. All right, another knowledge check. So, my organization is not required to submit an IRS Form 990 to the IRS, which means we are not required to submit one to the CFC. True or false? And again, go to live.voxvote.com, PIN number 38395. So my organization is not required to submit an IRS Form 990 to the IRS, which means we are not required to submit one to the CFC. Okay. Let's give them some more time. All right, so I need you to vote. Okay. So this one is a little bit more problematic for people. So the good thing is the majority of people said false. That is correct. So the IRS Form 990 or the pro forma IRS Form 990 is required of all charities, regardless of if they're doing a full application or a verification application. So every year that you submit a CFC application, you're submitting a Form 990. That is not a 990 EZ, PF, N, or whatever other variation that you submit to the IRS. So if your organization is not required to submit an IRS Form 990 to the IRS, then you need to do a pro forma IRS Form 990. So we get charities asking, well, where do I find a pro forma IRS Form 990 on the internet? I'm looking, I can't find it. It's not a different form. It is the IRS Form 990. It just means that you're only completing parts of that document for CFC purposes, and you don't have to submit it to the IRS. So remember when I mentioned the organizations that are chapters or affiliates, and they need to submit that CEO letter, and the CEO letter needs to state that the organization, a local organization, is covered by the national organization's financial statements in 990. That is true, but in the case where you're a chapter or affiliate, then you would still need to submit a pro forma. You can't submit the national organization's documents, Form 990. You can submit their audited financial statements or reviewed financial statements, but you cannot submit their IRS Form 990. The Form 990 has to be specific to the CFC applicants. So this is probably the second deficiency that we see the most with CFC applications. So we're a place of worship. We're not required to submit an IRS Form 990 to the IRS. Why are we having to do it for the CFC? Because it's in the regulations. We don't share regulations with with the IRS. They are different agencies, different regulations. So on step 8 of the application, there are 2 certification statements. So option 1 basically says that that the organization is required to submit the IRS Form 990 to the IRS. Option 2 basically says we are not required to submit an IRS Form 990 to the IRS. Please certify to the correct statement. We can always verify this information. It's literally just a simple check on the IRS's website whether or not IRS Form 990 is required of the organization. So I mentioned before, please don't submit the EZ, the PF, or the N to us. It says does not qualify for option 1, doesn't qualify for option 2 actually. So it's just, we don't accept it under any circumstances. If you have to do the EZ, the PF, and the N, then in that case you would do the pro forma. So one of the things that we added to the website last year on step 8 was the IRS Form 990 for charities for quick access. So if you're doing a pro forma, you have it right here. You don't have to go searching on the web. It's also helpful because different parts of that 990 are highlighted. So the parts that are highlighted are the parts that are required for the pro forma. And guess what? There are also the parts that we look for, that we review. So if you see something in yellow, make sure that it is filled out and it's correct. So we're trying to make this as clear and as easy for charities as possible. Even if you submitted an IRS Form 990 to the IRS and you already have that document in your files, you might still want to look at this that's on the page in the system, to look at the yellow parts to make sure that you're not missing any information. So the following sections must be completed. It lists them out on step 8 of the application on the right-hand side under step instructions. Those parts are listed out as well. So I'm not going to go into detail here about that. So each step of the application, I should have mentioned that there are step instructions. So again, very clear guidance to help you. So if you get confused at some point, read the step instructions. We also have videos on each step to help you. So it's really just a shorter version of this training that's in bite-sized pieces, like about 5 minutes or 10 minutes, to help you throughout various steps. Okay, so again, there's a completeness review check here. Just walks you through everything to look for, making sure that it's the correct version of the 990 that you're submitting, that you certify to the statements, that the name on that document corresponds to the name on the IRS determination letter or the DBA documentation, and the audited financial statements or reviewed financial statements, and the IRS determination letter if you submitted it on step 6. Make sure that the EIN is fully visible. So the EIN number is not a social security number. It's not private information. So we have charities that say, well, the reason why we blocked it out is because we don't want people to have our EIN number. It's not a social security number. It's not private. I can go onto the IRS's website or GuideStar to look up any of your EIN numbers. So if you have it where the EIN number was left blank, or because you redacted it, or there are asterisks, we've seen a lot of cases where the first few digits will be asterisked, and then maybe like the last four numbers, any part of that that's missing, that's a reason for us to deny your application, because we don't know if that 990 belongs to you. So make sure that you submit to us a copy of the 990 with your EIN number fully visible. And that number we need to make sure that that number corresponds to the BMF or that IRS determination letter. It has to be for a fiscal period ending on or after June 30th, and the same fiscal period as the financial statements that you submitted on step 7. You must report the number of voting members on part 1, line 3. So if you leave that blank, or if you say 0, we will deny your application. You have to have voting members. So the CFC regulations say that you need to have an active board of directors. So if you don't have voting members, then you don't have a board and you can't be in the CFC. Make sure that the IRS Form 990 was signed by an officer at the organization. So we're not looking for the tax preparer's information. The tax preparer is not vouching for your IRS Form 990, but the officer at the organization is vouching for the IRS Form 990. So we will deny you if the IRS Form 990 is not signed, because it means that it's still in draft form and not final. So if your organization submits it electronically, like most of you do, there's still a form that you would submit that form has the signature of the organization's director, and that form is 8879 EO or 8453 EO. So as long as we see an officer's signature on those forms, then we don't need to see it on the IRS Form 990. On part 7, under board members, please make sure that the listed individuals who are board members are identified as individual trustee or director or institutional trustee. We don't count officers, key employees as trustees. Make sure that you provide compensation information for each one of those listed board members. So the CFC regulations require that the organization is directed by an active board, the majority of which are not compensated. So we can only verify this if you've provided compensation information for each board member. If the board member was not compensated and you say, well, they didn't receive any income, so I'm just going to leave it blank. We don't interpret blanks as zeros. If they weren't compensated, you put a 0 there. So if you leave it blank, we don't know what that means. You will be denied. So please enter 0, or at the very top of that table on part 7, there's a statement that basically says that none of the board members received compensation. Then you would just hit that and we'll accept that. The other thing is on part 7, columns D, E, and F, 3 different columns where the individual might have received compensation, like say from a related organization. Make sure for each person that you're listing that you enter whatever that compensation is under D, E, and F. So we have it where Charities will just list under D or list F, and then they won't put in anything under one of the other 2 columns. That's, again, deficient. If you do mark that, remember that statement that I said on part 7 that basically says no trustee received compensation. Just make sure that if you mark that, none of your trustees receive compensation below. Because if you mark that, but then somebody received compensation, a trustee, then we don't know which information is correct here. So just make sure that they correspond to each other. You must report your organization's total revenue on column A, line 12 of part 8. That is required. We will also use that to verify that you certified to the right statement on step 7. So we have a few instances where on step 7, the charity will say, well, our revenue is under $100,000. We're not required to submit any financial statements. But then on the IRS Form 990, they had $1 million. So just make sure that the information is correct. Again, remember that advisory statement. The statement of functional expenses on Part 9 must report the management and general expenses and fundraising expenses. So similar to that compensation information where I said if it's 0, enter 0. You can't leave it blank. And honestly, if you're a charity that's been in the program for a couple of years for fundraising expenses, we shouldn't be seeing 0 because your application fee and listing fee technically are fundraising expenses. So make sure that you're not just putting something, it's correct information. We cannot calculate your AFR, which is required by regulation, without your total revenue and your expenses. So we can't list any organization without their AFR. So if you've neglected to enter your total revenue, management and general expenses, or your fundraising expenses, we won't be able to calculate your AFR. You will be denied. However, if for some reason on step 9 of your application you miscalculated your AFR, we won't deny your application for incorrect AFR. We'll just actually calculate the correct AFR and change it. If your organization's total revenue is above $100,000, on Part 12, the accounting method used should be accrual. So remember in the financial statements, you had to be in compliance with GAAP, which basically means that you've accounted for your funds based on the accrual method. We won't accept other or cash method. So the only situations where you can check something other than accrual is if your revenue is under $100,000. So another knowledge check. So my organization does not include in-kind donations in its calculation of the administrative fundraising rate. OPM will accept this calculation. Is that true or false? My organization does not include in-kind donations in its calculation of the administrative rate. OPM will accept this calculation. True or false? And again, you can vote at live.voxvote.com. PIN number is 38395. Okay, so the answer is false. So, thank you. On Part 9, the calculation is included. How we calculate the AFR is included. And that is the only calculation we will use. So if your organization does it a different way, that's not allowed. Part 8 of the IRS Form 990 under total revenue actually does have a part where you would report your in-kind donations, and that counts towards your revenue. Okay, we're almost out of time. So there's a certification statement for the AFR, certified to that. For these entry boxes for the management and general expenses, fundraising expenses, and total revenue, please make sure you're taking those numbers from the IRS Form 990. We see numbers where we really don't know where you got these numbers from. It needs to be from the IRS Form 990 because we're asking for that period of that fiscal period of that IRS Form 990. What was your AFR? So it's not what's your AFR today, it's what's your AFR during that fiscal period. Another knowledge check. My organization can count officers listed on the IRS Form 990 as trustees. True or false? My organization can count officers listed on the IRS Form 990 as trustees. True or false? It's that. Okay. Okay. Well, it's false. So remember I said that for the individuals listed on part 7 of the IRS Form 990, if they are a board member, you have to check them off as an individual trustee or an institutional trustee. So an officer is not a board member. So the IRS's instructions for the Form 990 considers officers as paid members at the organization. So some type of high-level official, an executive director, a CFO, a development director, not a board member. So we see this a lot. This is probably the third highest deficiency that we see. If we can't verify that your board is by and that your organization is directed by an active board of trustees, the majority of which serve without compensation, you've not met CFC requirements. And again, please take these numbers from the IRS Form 990. We're not asking you of your board makeup today. We're asking you of your board makeup during that fiscal period of which you submitted your IRS Form 990. So we've already talked about this. It's going through all the parts that are highlighted. Please make sure that you're paying attention to that. This part is easy. There are 4 verification statements on step 11. Read them, certify to these statements by clicking on yes, that they're correct. These aren't options, these are requirements. So if something does not apply for your organization and you don't certify to that, you can't participate in the CFC. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail with these next few slides. So again, just remember that you can edit your application anywhere between December 2nd and January 31st. You don't need us to reopen your application, but please make sure that your application is complete by January 31st, which means that you've also paid your application fee. If February 2nd, you realize that you submitted the wrong IRS Form 990 or you did not do something and you ask us to reopen your application, we will not. Once your application gets denied, you have the opportunity to fix that deficiency at that time. So once I send the instructions, the PowerPoint to you, you'll have the instructions for how to edit your application and sign your application. And then how you pay the application fee. Only credit cards are accepted, except in the case of federations, because again, they're submitting their application as well as at least 15 members. And in that case, we'll allow them to do an ACH pull because it's such a high dollar amount. The application fee is the only fee required to participate in the CFC. So this is the last knowledge check. The application fee is the only fee required to participate in the CFC. So while that's doing that, so the answer is false. There's an application fee and a listing fee. These are the fees for the 2020 campaign. So the application fee is required at the time that you submit your application. Once you're approved, you'll get notification, hey, you're approved. Go back into the system and complete your listing information, which includes your listing fee. If you fail to complete listing, your organization will not show up on the charity list. So we still have charities that are sending us emails during this live campaign right now that are saying that they can't find their organization, but that's because they never completed listing. We remind you multiple times. So it's your responsibility. Make sure you're given more than one email address to make sure that that you have that information. Thank you. You can withdraw your application at any time, but your application fee will not be refunded. So if you choose to do that, there are no refunds. The listing fee we will refund as long as we've not printed the charity booklet. So if you decide at some point after you've paid your listing fee that you would like to not participate in the program, we will refund your listing fee, but you need to make sure that you do that before the charity list is finalized, which is normally July 31st. Okay. So if you're approved, you'll get a notification email, and it will have instructions for how you complete listing. So I've already said the listing fee is required. The character statement is required. Your NTE codes, taxonomy codes are required, and you want to include those because it helps donors be able to filter. There are 5,000 charities in the system. So we have ways for donors to narrow down that list, and taxonomy codes are one of those ways. The care statement is optional but highly encouraged. So that is basically a thank you statement, a real-time thank you statement to donors. Volunteerism questions are optional, so it will basically ask you, do you have volunteer opportunities, and do you want to solicit CFC donors for volunteer time? And disbursement information is required. We actually have a lot of charities that don't put disbursement information. How will you get your money? It's required. You want to put that. For the character statement, telephone number, some of these things that are required, we are required by regulation to have a list with that information. And we do run into situations where you've not put that, so now we have to go on your website to grab that information. I will grab it if it's grammatically incorrect. If it's outdated, that's what I'm entering. So if you, we also will let you know before listing, verify your listing information. Please verify your listing information. If we've closed off the list and you ask us to verify that you've noticed an error, you've noticed your AFR is incorrect, or whatever the case may be, and you want to correct that information, we will not do that because we reminded you multiple times to do that. And, you know, it's an online pledging system. We can't correct paper, but with the online pledging system, you're probably thinking, well, why won't you? Well, we have 5,000 charities, and If we allow that, we will be correcting information for the rest of the campaign. So please check your information before we close off the list. If you're denied, you have one opportunity to appeal to the director of OPM. One. So if you're not successful on appeal, you can't submit another request. So we get that. Well, can I do this? Or I forgot to do this. Can I get another chance? You have one chance, one bite at that apple. Your denial of eligibility will have instructions for how you submit the appeal, and it's via the system. We don't accept the application or the appeal on paper. The appeal needs to be limited to the facts justifying the approval. So don't tell us all these other things. We just need you to correct the deficiency. You can't submit to us anything that was not previously available. So if your IRS Form 990 or your financial statements weren't final until after the application deadline, January 31st, we won't accept that on appeal. The application decision is final. There's a really good video that we did on common CFC application mistakes that's just short and succinct. I've talked about all of those things here already in this training. So when I send out this PowerPoint, you can watch the video. Please watch the video and make sure you're not making those mistakes. Every year we get those mistakes. If you have technical issues, you contact customer care for those types of issues. Their information is listed. For policy questions, you can contact OPM, that's us. Again, please make sure that you're not waiting until the last possible minute to submit your application or to pay your listing fee. OPM and the help desk, we're not, in the customer care center, we're not staffed until midnight on deadline days. So if you have any issues, it goes into the next day before we can get to you, and sorry. So please make sure that you're doing this well in advance of January 31st or the listing deadline, which is sometime in the summer. So we're out of time. If you have questions that you've already emailed to cfc@opm.gov, you will get a response back to you. Please, you can continue to send emails to cfc@opm.gov, and by the end of the week, you'll get responses. And for anyone here in the auditorium, you can also email us there, and we'll make sure we get you an answer. So thank you for joining us today, and good luck with your CFC applications.